समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Left it a little bit late, didn't you? The customs officer joked. The last flight from Berlin to London had arrived just minutes after the beginning of the Second World War, piloted by a tall, elegant-looking Australian who until recently had been running an apple drying factory in his homeland. The customs operatives had no way of knowing it, but Frederick Sidney Cotton was also among the United Kingdom's most valued spies, an inventor and photographic pioneer who had used his business activities as a cover to gain critical aerial reconnaissance photographs of Nazi military and troop formations. And although he didn't know it yet, he was going to have a big role in the making of war and peace in modern India. The son of farmers born in 1894 on a cattle station at Gurganga, Cotton's birth and station did not seem to mark him out for glory. For much of his young life, he worked as a jackaroo, which I'm told is a young man working at a sheep station to gain experience. From all of this, it might seem there's little reason to think Cotton should even be known to Indians. And then there's this. The young pilot ran an extraordinary gun running operation for Pakistan and its intelligence services that supplied the Nizam of Hyderabad and his Razakar paramilitaries with thousands of weapons to fight off India in 1947-1948. His gun-running operation would help fuel the savage communal war that broke out in Hyderabad after partition, a war that claimed far more lives than India's much better-known struggle in Kashmir from 1947 to 1948. Hi and welcome to this week's episode of The Print Explorer. The entire country has been talking about the crisis that's followed the Pahalgam attacks, and in the last episode we examined the multiple stages of jihadist covert operations Pakistani intelligence crafted to capture Kashmir. This time we're going to be talking about a war most Indians have forgotten ever happened, but was much more consequential in some ways. Like Kashmir continued to be a target of jihadist ambition over 7.5 decades, so has Hyderabad. The Lashkar-e-Taiba still sees recapturing the city as at least as important as retaking Kashmir. This there's no doubt about. Enemy of India he might have become in 1947, but Sidney Cotton was an exceptional man. Following the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, the civilian ship that drew America into the war, he left his apple farm in Australia and joined the Royal Air Force. 2 years later, he quit after a spat with his officers. Then, following his divorce in 1926, Cotton married 18-year-old Millicent Joan Henry. From this time until 1939, he led a colourful and eventful life. Among other things, he flew seal spotting services for hunters, as well as search and rescue operations to locate lost explorers in Newfoundland and Greenland. In 1927, when two French airmen, Charles Nungueza and Francois Colli, vanished during an attempt to cross the Atlantic non-stop, Cotton was hired by the wealthy DuPont family to try and find the missing airmen. Later in 1931, Cotton found and rescued the British Arctic explorer Augustine Courtauld, who had been trapped in an ice field in Greenland. At a time when most photographs were in black and white, Cotton purchased the rights to sell outside of France a French colour film called Du Fait Color, which led him to engage in frequent business travel to Germany. The photographic business didn't do too well, but French intelligence services, the 12e Bureau, persuaded him to carry out secret photo reconnaissance flights over Germany, Italy, and the then Italian colony of Libya. Then, in 1939, the British intelligence organization purchased his loyalties, providing him with a brand new Lockheed 12E Electra aircraft to conduct espionage missions over German industrial infrastructure and troop formations. The plane was equipped with 3 concealed F-24 cameras which could be operated with a switch hidden under the pilot's seat. Cotton, it said, often took along his mistress, Patricia Martin, who also participated in this secret photography. The pilot's charm was legion. On one occasion, he persuaded the German Air Force officer Albert Kesselring to accompany him on an unauthorized joyride over German airfields, the better to photograph them. Following a failed 11th hour effort to persuade Nazi leader Hermann Goering to make a secret trip to London and meet with Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, Cotton finally fled Berlin in 1939. Even as he took off, it said, German aircraft were lifting off in the opposite direction to bomb Poland. Through the Second World War, Cotton engaged in multiple acts of critical value to the campaign, including the development of high-altitude, high-speed stereoscopic photography that offered unmatched views of battlefield targets. Like so many mavericks, though, he repeatedly clashed with authority. A flight intended to evacuate British secret agents from France ended up being used to pull out Marcel Boussac, the head of the Christian Dior garment and perfume empire, for a generous fee. That's not the kind of thing British intelligence services liked. Though Cotton continued to work as a photo reconnaissance consultant with the Navy, his intelligence career was over. From Cotton's own account of his journey, he ended up in India by accident, hearing that a large amount of road-making equipment might be coming up for sale as war surplus. There was also a client in London, Cotton wrote, who was interested in purchasing a consignment of peanuts from Hyderabad. The British, Cotton learnt during his visit to India, had promised the Nizam of Hyderabad that they would not hand over paramountcy to India, and negotiations were underway for a means for the state and the 15% of its population who were Muslim to have some semi-independent status in the Union. Remember, a lot of the Maharajas wanted that kind of deal. The government of India, frustrated with the lack of progress in these negotiations, had imposed an embargo. But Cotton found a businessman in Bombay who was prepared to get him the necessary paperwork if he could get the peanuts out of Hyderabad somehow. Flying his Lockheed over Pune, Cotton succeeded in landing in Hyderabad in February 1948. In the coming days, the pilot, never one to let an opportunity go, succeeded in securing meetings with the Nizam's advisor, William Monckton, the Manchester-educated engineer and businessman who served as Prime Minister, Mir Laik Ali, and Peter El Edrus, a subaltern who had risen to become de facto commander of the Hyderabad Armed Forces. Cotton was told that the food situation had become desperate, even though tons of supplies were piled up at Hyderabad's borders. To make things worse, like Ali and El Edrus told Cotton, they were certain that the embargo was a build-up to an Indian military intervention. The Nizam, they claimed, had provided the United Kingdom with £80 million worth of modern war-fighting equipment for their campaign against the Japanese during the Second World War, but none of it had been returned. The sole ordnance factory in Hyderabad, moreover, had been shut down. At this stage, Cotton began assembling what would develop into a full-blown operation to run arms into Hyderabad. Flying to Karachi armed with letters of introduction, he met Pakistan's new president, Iskandar Mirza. Iskandar explained that Pakistan wanted Hyderabad to remain an independent state, but did not have the equipment on hand to arm the Nizam's forces. Iskandar also worried that the Indian Air Force might interdict supplies. But Cotton was confident he could somehow pull this off. In March 1948, Cotton arrived back in London and signed a contract for the lease of 12 aircraft, 4 Lancastrians, 4 Yorks and 4 Skymasters, together capable of ferrying in some 500 tons in just a few days. And the United Kingdom's air charter law made it illegal for British registered aircraft to carry weapons except under a direct charter from the Crown or the state. This, Cotton reasoned, would not apply to his operation since a charter signed by a dominion, in this case Pakistan, was in effect a crown charter. Well, perhaps, perhaps not, but it was a legal argument. Laik and El Edrus, meanwhile, drew up lists of the weapons they needed. The initial demands included anti-tank weapons and artillery. Iskandar Mirza struck down these demands and insisted only ammunition and rifles be supplied. The deal almost fell apart, moreover, after Skyways, the leasing partner, realized the potential legal minefield it was wading into. Two other charter companies, though, TransCanada Airways and Silver City Airways, stepped into the breach. The government of Pakistan, meanwhile, deposited £2 million into a London bank account to purchase the first tranche of weapons from Switzerland. The weapons themselves were bought through a contact Iskandar Mirza had been able to make at Oerlikon in Zurich. The weapons were, to avoid British attention, flown from the free airport of Basel Mulhouse to Chile in South America and then shipped back to London. There's some reason to believe that British intelligence was in fact aware of the game Pakistan was playing and perfectly willing to let it go on. As he prepared for his first ferry mission from London, Cotton was taken aside by the chief customs officer and offered a glass of whisky. "We know what you're doing, Mr. Cotton," he was told, "and we want to wish you good luck." There were customs officials waiting at Malta too, but they were pretty disinterested. "We're loaded to the roof with arms and ammunition," Cotton told them. They laughed. Living in Karachi wasn't without its inconveniences. An advance payment of £70,000 Cotton had been promised by Pakistan didn't come through, so he was obliged to use his own money to hire a hotel and villas for his crew. There was no doubt, Cotton later wrote, that there were elements in the Pakistan government who feared repercussions and were not wanting to openly defy the Indian government. Early in June, though, word came from Hyderabad that an Indian invasion was imminent. The weapons were loaded onto the aircraft and the first flight from Karachi took off on 4 June 1948. El Edrus was waiting for the weapons at Warangal airstrip. The negotiations with Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru had not gone well, he explained, and Hyderabad would now need a military supply of some 3,000 tons, not just 500 tons. Cotton flew back to Karachi and got a new commercial agreement which the government of Pakistan immediately signed. There were dramatic developments, though, that were forcing the pace of events on the ground faster than Cotton's aircraft could move. On 7 June 1948, Prime Minister Laik had a long conversation with the Viceroy, Louis Mountbatten, who advised him to accept India's demands for a plebiscite. To Mountbatten, it seemed evidence that the wishes of a small Muslim minority could not stand in the way of the wishes of the Hindu majority forever. The principle of a plebiscite seemed the only way around this. There was, of course, as we all know, a price to be paid. Kashmir had to be granted the right to a plebiscite too, on exactly the same grounds. Laik Ali reluctantly accepted the demand for a plebiscite, but also prepared to fight. Following the first Oerlikon arms deliveries, Cotton records, 16 more flights arrived in Warangal. Word had begun to spread of his arms runs as journalists poured into Hyderabad to report on events. The aircraft now rerouted to Bidar to avoid the journalists and the crowds. That wasn't the end of Cotton's security problems, though. The ethnic Pashtun guards who protected Cotton's terminus in Karachi told him they had been offered bribes by Indian spies to hand over the contents of the dustbins from the offices with all their manifests and letters. Late in July, Cotton moved to rid himself of legal problems altogether and set up a company in Pakistan which pretended to be supplying medical aid to Hyderabad. He even got the Indian High Commissioner to visit one of his facilities and see an aircraft dressed up as an air ambulance. He invited journalists to inspect them too. Efforts to intercept Cotton's flights made by the Indian Air Force's Tempest failed. Remember, there was no radar back then in India. Finally, by the end of July, Nehru's patience had run out. Even though figures like former Prime Minister Winston Churchill condemned India's decisions to send troops into Hyderabad, the United Kingdom itself had little will to stop New Delhi. Legal proceedings were begun against Cotton for gun running, though he would escape with a token £200 fine. The story didn't have a happy ending for Cotton though. He had to wait 14 years for his payments to be made by Pakistan, a process that was only completed after Field Marshal Ayub Khan staged a coup d'etat in 1958. The arms Cotton had brought into Hyderabad though would fuel brutal bloodshed. The Nizam and his Razakar militia stepped up coercion of Hyderabad's Hindu population, emboldened that they had the military resources to act. That would prove a hideous miscalculation. To Nehru, it seemed that the wars in Kashmir and Hyderabad might help unify the nation. He saw, I quote, Hindu and Muslim and Sikh and others fighting on an equal basis and for a fight for their own freedom. He felt this may well be the saving of us in many ways by changing the entire communal atmosphere. By the end of May 1948, the government of Bombay had raised 15,000 home guards out of a target of 40,000. The district magistrate was, I quote, issuing weapons very freely in bordering villages. Police constables from Sholapur district accompanied a group of 300 state congressmen to attack a Hyderabad police outpost in February. Fond illusions of a united liberation, though, were soon to give way to the reality of a bitter communal war. The government released figures that almost 2,000 people lost their lives in military operations, but allegations of large-scale anti-Muslim violence continued to appear in September and October in that year. In November, Nehru himself reported that he had been informed of, I quote, the massacre of some thousands of Hindus as well as a great deal of looting. The Pandit Sundarlal report commissioned by the government concluded that Ozamabad, Gulbarga, Bidar and Nanded were the districts worst affected by the violence, where, I quote, the number of people killed during and after the police action was not less than, if not more than 18,000. They estimated that in Aurangabad, Beed, Nalgonda and Medak, more than 5,000 lives were lost in each district. Like in all our counterinsurgencies, the Indian army fought well, but it did not always cover itself in glory. Even though the Sundarlal report recorded that on the whole the army had done splendidly well, it asserted that, I quote, at a number of places, members of the armed forces brought out Muslim adult males from villages and towns and massacred them in cold blood. Elsewhere, I quote, they encouraged and even persuaded the Hindu mobs to loot Muslim shops and houses. An October 1948 intelligence report noted that some Sikh units in the Indian army, I quote, actively assisted sections of the irresponsible Hindu public. Like Kashmir, Hyderabad has remained a leitmotif of the Lashkar-e-Taiba project ever since. At a February 2000 Lashkar rally, Hafiz Saeed's deputy Abdul Rahman Makki proclaimed the Lashkar would soon initiate operations in Hyderabad, a city claimed by Pakistan's Islamist right wing to have been illegally seized by Indian forces. Together with radicals who broke away from the Students' Islamic Movement of India, the Lashkar saw its jihad in Jammu and Kashmir as merely a stepping stone towards the reclamation of an imagined Muslim land sprawled across India. By the account of the Pakistani journalist Zahid Hussain, this worldview was rooted in Saeed's personal experiences of partition. The horrors of the partition in 1947, Zahid writes, which uprooted his family from their home in Shimla, left a huge imprint on Hafiz Saeed's property. 36 members of his family were killed while migrating to Pakistan, he writes. Even as it wages jihad in Kashmir, the Lashkar had been attempting to build a network across India using local Islamists. Perhaps the most successful of the Lashkar's agents was Muhammad Ishtiaq, the son of a shopkeeper from Kala Gujra in Pakistan's Jhelum district. Operating under the alias Salim Junaid, Ishtiaq obtained an Indian passport and even married a local Hyderabad resident, Momina Khatun. Ishtiaq, however, was arrested before he could do real harm. In late 1988, Responding to desperate pleas from the Lashkar's leadership, Hyderabad resident Muhammad Azam Ghori returned from Pakistan to India to help rebuild its networks. Ghori was one of the 3 co-founders of the Indian Jihad. He turned to friends in Hyderabad's organized crime cartels for help. In 1999, his long-standing friend, the Hyderabad mafioso Abdul Aziz Sheikh, attempted to assassinate the Shiv Sena leader Milind Vaidya, one of the key figures in organizing the post-Babri Masjid communal riots in Mumbai. Help was sought and received from the remnants of the mafia of Muhammad Fasiuddin, which had executed Hindu fundamentalist leaders Papaya Gaud and Nandaraja Gaud as retaliation for the 1992 anti-Muslim riots in the city. And soon after Makki's speech in 2000, Ghori's mafia-linked jihadi network set off bombs in cinema theatres in Karimnagar and Nanded. Jihadi organizations continued to build new networks in Hyderabad though. In August 2001, the Hyderabad police arrested one of the most intriguing figures in this campaign, an unassuming electrician named Abdul Aziz. While working in Saudi Arabia, Aziz had come into contact with an Islamist recruiter looking for volunteers to join the global jihad. Aziz served in Bosnia in 1994 and then fought alongside Chechen Islamists in 1996. In 1999, Aziz again flew to Tbilisi in search of a second tour of duty. He was, however, deported. With the help of funds from Hamid Bahajib, a Saudi Arabia-based Lashkar financier, Aziz returned home to try and initiate a jihad of his own. Fortunately, the intelligence services in India were a step ahead of most of these efforts. But starting from September 2002, at least 14 young men from Hyderabad set out on secret journeys to terror training camps in Pakistan. The hatred generated by the communal violence in Gujarat helped Islamist groups reap this fresh harvest. The recruits were to form a key part of the Indian Mujahideen, India's most lethal urban terrorist network. The Hyderabad War of 1947-1948 might be forgotten in India, but it lives on in the minds of Pakistan's military and their jihadist proxies. The embers almost certainly will one day ignite again. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor with ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of The Print Explorer.